Really?
Did you see the Four Winds? The card says stay 10,000 nights and get the next year free. But it says owner since 1983.
Really? Man.
Oh, you got a free tour? Wow. Well, one. So we're just going to charge you the $12.
I'm the kid.
This is Paul, I'm your tour guide. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Where is everybody from?
South Carolina.
Oh, my. Okay.
Minnesota.
Okay.
Illinois.
Okay. Who's not been to the theater before, ever?
To this theater.
To this theater.
To a theater.
Good point. All right. Well, you're in for a big treat today. So this is the Al Ringling Theater, built by Al Ringling. He was the oldest of the 7 Ringling brothers. 5 of those brothers started this Ringling Brothers Circus here in Baraboo in 1884, just a couple blocks away. As a wagon-pulled show originally, and then after 6 years they switched to rail. And by the turn of the 20th century, they were becoming some of the richest men in the county for sure, in the state, and eventually the country. Around that time, about 1905, Al Ringling started planning his house, which is just around the corner. Does everybody know where that is?
Right.
Mansion. That was put up in 1905-06 at a cost of $35,000 when the average house was about $2,500. His carriage house alone was $8,000. While he was planning that, something happened here in Baraboo that brought about the need for a new theater, and that was our old opera house burned to the ground. In February of 1905, it was a very humble structure. It was actually an 1880s roller skating rink that had been converted into an opera house. We don't have any pictures of it. It was so ugly. But, but it was a large space that could hold a lot of people. So when it burned down, we were left with a big hole. Attempts were made over the next several years to get investors or people that would pool together to build a new auditorium, but it was just too big of a deal. You would need at least $50,000 to build anything of any size. Finally, in 1912, Al and his wife Lou Ringling broke the news in all 3 Baraboo newspapers at the time that they would build the new theater. And the details at that time were very specific. It was to be a theater with a center entrance, a store on either side, a 3-story facade, and an interior with a balcony. The old hotel that was on the site was immediately torn down, and then everything ground to a halt. And that was because some things that were going on in Al's life. One was Wisconsin state income tax, which had been enacted just prior to that, and Ringlings were fighting that. They didn't think they should pay Wisconsin income tax and all of the money they made in other states, but they had to wait and see how that would play out in case they had a big tax liability. Fortunately, they won that fight, and then in the summer of 1914, Al and Lou had a little rocky point in their marriage. Al actually filed for divorce against her. We're not sure why, although one New York newspaper suggested desertion, so that would be desertion on her part. There is an apocryphal story that Lou said when Al got rich, he got boring. So, don't know if that's true or not. Fortunately, they patched things up, but Al did have to advance Lou $100,000 in the summer of 1914 to get himself out of the doghouse. And that's exactly what it took the following year, 1915, to build the Al Ringling Theater. So by that time, 3 years later, plans had changed. We believe that the original 1912 plans were drawn by the same architects, George and Cornelius Rapp, or Rapp and Rapp out of Chicago. And fortunately for us, they scrapped those plans and came up with a new design in 1915. The Rapps became famous for their theater designs across the country. This is about number 20 of their theaters. They went on to design well over 350 more theaters across the country. So they were still kind of cutting their teeth here at the Al, and with Al Ringling's bottomless checkbook, they could pull out all the stops and use the best of everything. So they changed their plans. This is based on a plan they had executed the year before in Champaign, Illinois, the Orpheum Theater there. And that one and this one are the only 2 that we know of that were made to look like little French opera houses. So they do not have balconies. The only 2 that we know of out of their repertoire. And as you'll see inside, they're little French opera houses. So they door, or the entrance was put off to the side. Then we have 3 storefronts. Some of you were over here in the gallery space. Originally, those were 3 separate storefronts with no connection to the theater. Internally, they were just rentable space. And then doors at the end of the building led to a suite of offices upstairs that could also be rented out for additional income. Anything to help make the building make money 24/7. So the theater is also very well documented and preserved. We have all 16 sheets of paper this size that were the original plans for the theater. It was built with 16 sheets of paper. The architects were also very proud of this theater, so they had a firm come up and photograph the theater shortly after it was finished. So these are just within days of its completion and give us some clues to what has changed. Really not a lot has changed, as you'll see in the auditorium. Outside, of course, our original canopy was replaced with the marquee that we have today from 1937, but it was also designed by Rapp & Rapp. They were still in business and came back to design that. And you'll also see in the lobby, that's where the biggest changes have taken place. If you were in the gallery space, you walk through this wall right here, and we'll talk about this fountain a little bit later in the lobby. The theater is also probably the most best documented early motion picture house in the country. We have 49 file drawers 2 feet deep of solid paper that document every scrap of paper from opening day in 1915 to 1953. Everything from the check that Al Ringling signed on opening night to pay for the first performance, to things like a letter from Harry Houdini from 1924, asking us to book one of his films. Wasn't very good. We didn't book it, but the theater manager dutifully filed it, along with the booking contract and even the return envelope that just says Houdini, New York, New York. So we're still going through all of that, but it's easily the best documented early motion picture house in the country. A couple other things here. This is a piece of plaster from the auditorium from the restoration 3 years ago. And when they got up there, they realized this is the original finish. Should be gold, like on the 2 columns there. But they realized that it had tarnished horribly and also was very dirty after 100 years. So they cleaned all of that and repainted it to look like it should, and you'll see that inside. But for many years, a lot of us grew up with a brown Al Ringling Theater. Piece of terracotta here from the outside. What looks like stone out there is actually terracotta. It's hollow ceramic material that's easily moldable, cheaper than stone, but also does not like any weather whatsoever. This is the box that we call it the box office. Every slot had a ticket which was numbered and lettered, so somebody had to laboriously stick those in to the right slot, but then when they were in there, you could pull them out as they were sold and see what seats were still available, just like the model or the depiction on your computer screen today. This was a very expensive box of tickets, and to keep it safe, it could be locked up. Oh my goodness. And this was at the box office, which is where we get terms like home box office or HBO today. So here's the box. We know it's the original ticket box because we've not only found the brochure that this was picked out of, we have the receipt for this exact ticket box from 1915. So moving on to our gratitude wall, we have names of the people that helped with the latest restaurant, almost identical today because the same company, American Seating, came back in 2015 and put in the new seats that we have in there today. Unfortunately, they could not use these old ends because the mounting hardware on the back does not jive with the modern seats, but you'll see that they're almost identical. Down here we have the latest addition to this area. This is the original lighting board from the stage. The bottom portion put in 1915. These are open throw Frankenstein style knife switches. This one is 100 amps at 250 volts right here. So you have to be very careful around this. This was actually partially in use until the 1990s.
Wow.
In 1916, they added this dimmer rack system up above. These are Cutler hammer dimmers. And they can be controlled independently or in groups by pulling these levers out and disengaging them, singly or in groups. So that was pretty novel. Most people didn't even have electricity in their homes, let alone dimmable lights and things like that.
Or something. It's the lighting on with it.
Yep.
How could you do such a thing way back?
Spaces there, 2 there that you see, and 1 behind the door at the end. were the original 3 storefronts. They had absolutely no connection to each other or to the interior of the theater. There was only one door going outside each space, and those were rented out. And this lobby, too, did not have any openings right or left. So when it came in 1915, these were the only doors you could go into. And imagine this lobby servicing 800 to 900 people when the theater was full. So we like to say it was 10 pounds in a 5-pound sack here at various times.
They never pass fire codes today.
Right. Well, we did have plenty of fire exits inside, fortunately, but this was the original ticket window that was put back in a few years ago. Again, found down in the basement. Even the light fixture was down there, the marble shelf. And behind that is the closet under the staircase going upstairs. So the architects thought, oh, they can run the theater out of a closet under the stairs. Well, the management suffered that for about 6 years, actually called this a dog kennel. And then they convinced the Ringling family that they would take over the first storefront space there, put a ticket window into this wall, and have a much bigger theater office, which they did. And then tearing out the fountain, which was right here against this wall. But they saved as much of it as they could. Here's the statue from the fountain. It was only wet for about 6 years. It then sat on the staircase landing for about 90 years, and we brought it back to the lobby here during the restoration. We thought the urns were long gone until somebody pointed out that they were up in the flag loft. So we found them up there, brought them down, cleaned them up, and put them back here in the lobby. Al was an avid fisherman. He loved to be on Mirror Lake, just north of here. So we think that the little boy holding the fish is certainly a tribute to his love of fishing. We have 7 putti on this side. We call them cherubs generally, but in our world they're called putti plural or puto singular. So we have 7 putti on this side. Of course, being the 7 Ringling brothers, Al is shown there holding one of them is shown holding a shield with Al's monogram, AR. And then down here we have the only female in the picture. That is the only surviving Ringling sister, Ida, who's attending the body of an 8th Ringling brother, George, who died in infancy here in Baraboo. We know this all means
Nice.
If you'd come in about 4 years ago, you would have walked into a much darker interior, bright red redder carpet, I should say, with red duct tape covering ripped seams. The walls were battleship gray from the 1970s, and the ceilings were virtually black. So every surface in here, wall, floor, ceiling, has been replaced, restored, or renovated. And 2 upstairs. This was one of them originally, and it ran city gas 24/7 until the 1990s.
Oh, wow.
It had the white cloth mantles on it, just like a Coleman lantern, and literally sputtered and hissed 24/7. So all that little, even just tiny molecular amounts of smoke, this bay in particular was completely black, and the others just suffered from lack of maintenance and cleaning. Light fixtures were also all restored. It was discovered when they started dealing with them that they're actually cast plaster. All of this is cast plaster over heavy wire armature, and so once they rewired them, they were handed over to the painters to be repainted and restored. Thanks for the gas, because if you've never been here before, it's quite a surprise.
It's cool in here.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I like this too.
Oh, wow.
Man.
Oh, my.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, not your typical theater. If you grew up in Baraboo, you thought every town had a theater like this until you went to Reedsburg or Portage and sat in their box. All the theater. Come on in and
Man.
We went to?
Look at this.
I was here, but I
This looks like
went
a...
to the Fitzgerald in St. Paul, and it's
Okay.
kind of similar. I mean, it has the little
Yeah.
boxes here. And
That's
things.
where Garrison Keeler did his
Right,
podcast.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is awesome.
These are the new seats. And
Yep. Yep, the seat ends are pretty much the same, the monogram.
Yeah, they do try to replicate it.
Yep.
Man.
All right, so the Rapp brothers loved French architecture. They designed a lot of their theaters in the French style. If you've been to the Chicago Theater in Chicago, that was designed by Rapp and Rapp just 6 years after this theater, and it can house 4,500 people. So you could probably put this theater in their lobby. So they grew rather quickly. But I like this theater because it is more architecturally pure. The Chicago Theater is like an aircraft hangar trying to decorate it to look like a French palace. It's just so enormous. But here we have a little French opera house. The architects probably coined the phrase that's been bantered around that this is a 1/3 scale copy of the opera house at Versailles. It is not, but it is certainly inspired by the opera house at Versailles and other grand theaters in Bordeaux, which the Rapp brothers saw in 1910, 1911 when they both went over to see the glories of France. So fortunately for us, they gave us this very special design. So we have 17 boxes instead of a balcony, and often Rapp and Rapp love these little half-round boxes. You'll see these at the Chicago Theater. Tucked under the balcony is another level of seating, but here it's just so architecturally pure, and when we get on stage, you'll see one of the best views of the theater is actually from the stage. About 15 of the boxes, we have hand-painted murals by the G.A. Brand Company out of Chicago. Gustav Brand was a German immigrant that came over to work on the German building at the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Then he stayed here in America working at Marshall Fields and eventually having his own mural painting business. So he describes them as showing various pleasurable human emotions, joy, delight. We've looked at them extensively to see if there's any symbolism to all the things that the characters are holding. We can't really crack the code if it's the 7 virtues or anything like that. But we do know that the first mural off to the right, up in the clouds, is Ida and George again. I think the woman below could be an homage to Mother Ringling, who also had 2 other Ringling children, a boy and a girl who were not named. So that works out perfectly again with the family numbers. So we have 2 or 3 putti in the clouds above each of the adult figures, except for the rear center box. We have an adult angel, or adult figure rather, painted there instead. Not sure why, although that is over Al Ringling's personal box. Just to the left of that, the mural has kind of a nude figure coming up from behind, holding an chalice. They certainly didn't expect me to be pointing it out, and murals were not uplit until the 1920s, so it would have been harder to see that, but that is where the projection equipment is. This was built as a movie house, playhouse, right from the start. All right, in the ceiling, the rest of the ceiling, the large oval with the clouds has been restored. In 2015, they laboriously took off all the paint that had been painted over the clouds to reveal the original clouds and fix them up. So those are the original clouds that we're looking at. The chandelier is original. Again, it's largely made of plaster molded over heavy pipe, and it has 48 lights and some generous cobwebs up there that I see. And it can be lowered down to this level by getting into the attic.
To this level?
Yeah, and get up into the attic. You can unplug it and lower it with a hand-cranked winch to lower it and clean it and relamp it. Above the chandelier, there's round open grillwork that is part of the giant air handling system here at the theater. That's where the air gets sucked out of the room. And below each row of seats, there's a mushroom-shaped vent under each row of seats where the cold and heated air comes out. So there's 4 tunnels under the seating that deliver that air to each row of the theater. We'll talk about its utilitarian function on stage, but from this point, this side of the things, it is a large piece of artwork. Oftentimes in other opera houses, you'll see these with advertising around the edges where people could pay to have their names up there, but of course this was Al Ringling's baby, so none of that was necessary. You'll see the title there at the bottom, Serenade au Petit Trianon. The Trianon was a small palace on the grounds of Versailles in France. It was actually given to Queen Marie Antoinette by Louis XVI as her little separate little palace. And on the grounds of the Petit Trianon, she had a small French village built, recreated a Norman village so she could play peasant. So it actually had thatched roofs, stuccoed walls, half timbered, but often had marble interiors. That's a job for another day. The valance was actually folded up about 2/3 of the way down to allow for a larger movie screen in the 1950s, and during the restoration it was let back down. We were very fearful that it would have rotted through where it was folded, but it came down like a champ, and we now see the tassels and fringe that were not visible for about 70 years. Well, again, 10 pounds in a 5-pound sack. So if you think the pit couldn't have been any smaller, and it was, there's a crack here on the floor, a seam in the concrete. This was the original front of the pit right here. And when Al Ringling decided to add an organ, they had to put the original theater organ console right here in the middle. It was like an upright grand piano. So we can imagine that and a bench. There was precious little room to get somebody behind the organist to this side of the pit. The door to the dressing rooms is right there, which you'll see for anybody that goes down there with me. So that's a little castanet machine, tambourine, woodblock, drum, cymbals, bass drum. Also some things like the glisso is opened and the air that's being blown up there goes through it. So. Organ should. Organ also comes out.
Wow.
So inside each of these 4 posts are giant screws that are all connected with chain and sprocket underneath, and hopefully it goes up and stops.
Off the world, huh?
Up to the ceiling.
So the organist could be up here for a concert or before a movie, and then of course go back down so as not to block the view here.
Wow.
So this is a Barton 3-9, meaning it has 3 manuals and 9 ranks or rows of pipes. And again, the theater organ was an adaptation of the church organ brought into the theater and then augmented with special effects and sounds to accompany silent films usually. And when a real organist comes in, they can use these preset buttons here to drop a number of stops at the same time. So they aren't up here trying to do all of that. And they would set this up for a particular movie, and they can also be cleared out. I'll play a few sounds here. Wasn't enough operating your hands, you also could put your feet into the mix.
You already have your shoes off?
No, I've seen them. They have very tiny feet and much tinier shoes than I do. I can play a whole.
You have horseshoes on.
Right. So some of the special effects included thunder, which with some other bass sounds could be effective. Then after the rain stopped, the birds would come out. So some of the other instruments up there, the chrysoglot harp, great for dream sequences and fairies and things like that. Cathedral chimes, great for doorbells, clock bells.
Is there organist in town here that plays this thing?
Yeah, there's a few that every once in a while.
They're hard to find them.
Yes, absolutely. Here's the tambourine for Spanish films. Castanets. The wood block. It's a little humid up there today, so it's a little trouble. It's a great when Charlie Chaplin stepped on a rake. The tom-tom. Cowboy and Indian films. The snare drum has not been working for a few years. Down below we also can have the bass pedal or the bass drum. And a cymbal to that. Well on your way to a parade coming down the street. Other things here. Oh, the xylophone, the rosewood xylophone up there. I think that's everything. Any questions about the...
How about the applause button?
That was on the other organ. I wish we had it on this button. It must have been something like the castanets and just made a lot of clattering sound. Here we go. Yep. There's the handrail here. There we go. Okay. Now I like right forward and running. I can literally feel the
Vibrations.
Oh, I see peepholes. Yep. Take a look at the peepholes.
Oh, you darn. Oh, you darn.
So take a look at the peepholes if you want.
For some people.
I know.
The peephole.
You had to pick a side. You had to pick a height, I guess.
I don't know whether I can get this through there or not.
Has a very utilitarian purpose is to isolate
The peephole.
the stage
That's a long
from the
camera.
audience if there's a fire
Oh,
on
yeah.
the stage, so it can be lowered to isolate the stage. On the outside of the theater, if you look up at the very top of the theater, there looks like there's two green sheds on top of the fly loft. Those are actually the covers for the smoke hatches about 70 feet above our heads. There's two giant hatches that can open up in case of fire to allow the smoke to escape, and also that would create positive draft from all the fire exits that are now open up and out. So that would draw fresh air into the auditorium, providing a better experience for the patrons. Everybody back here was fending for themselves, but they knew where the exits were and were a little bit calmer than 800 people on the other side of that curtain. So I'm going to raise the fire curtain now, and you can get one of the best views of the theater.
It's a manual for him to pull in.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Man.
I don't think I've ever been on stage before.
My friends and fellow Americans, we are here today to honor.
So normally in other theaters, you'll be looking out at a balcony, maybe an upper balcony, a projection room above that, and it'll just get uglier.
Is that where the square is
Where the projection room is, yep. So here at the Al, this is really one of the best. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought they were covers over the top.
Oh yeah, no, they're cut out. We often wondered why they didn't have like inserts to complete the piece, but the original photographs show them just as they are like that. Again, they didn't expect us to be bringing people on stage. When we reopened in 2016 after the restoration, the big program was Frank Sinatra Jr., and he said during that performance that in his career this is one of the top 5 prettiest theaters he had ever performed in. So that was quite a compliment. There are the first 8 rows. You can see Al's monogram on the back of the seats. Originally the first 14 rows were like that, and then the remaining rows behind that were actually just wooden fold-down seats. This time we decided to pad them all and just put the monogram on the first 8 rows. And see a show and take a special late-night train back to their hometown. So this was used by more than just the citizens of Baraboo, to be sure. Lionel Barrymore, Mary Pickford, and Gene Autry have all performed on the stage in person. Stage?
Did you say this was added on afterwards?
No, this is all original.
Oh.
Yep.
But it was,
Oh, look at that.
The dressing room is one, eh?
Yeah. Now, like when the little girls do their dance thing, they'll use these dressing
Yeah,
rooms.
Frank
and-
Sinatra Jr. was down here.
Really?
Wanted a
Wow.
small couch down here, which they got down here, but this is what we got.
Wow.
This is the door to the orchestra pit.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine getting a cello up those stairs in the dark.
Man.
That is cute.
How many people would be
How
in that
many?
pit then
Well,
playing?
B and R.
Uh-huh.
No, B and R, I should add, was the one in the corner. Number 1 is probably the most preferred since it's the closest to the stage, but there's no like real special, star dressing room. There's bathrooms down at the end, And the far door there
Where
goes
was
to
the one with Frank Sinatra Jr.?
That I don't know. I got to ask them.
How many can hold count?
Door down there goes to the giant boiler room, which eventually was where all the coal was stored as well. So just tons and tons of coal were fed into the base for many, many years. And the balance of the space blowers for the giant air handling system. The blower room is actually a room you can walk into. And down here, the room that houses the blower, much smaller blower for the organ. All right, let's go back up to the pretty parts. We have the last look mirror here, much newer. We believe that's the original last look mirror, much tarnished, but we don't ever want to replace it because everybody that's ever performed here has looked in that mirror.
Yeah. If I could sing and dance, I would. It's the first time I've ever been on stage.
She's very talented otherwise, so.
Yeah. It's not anything. Pardon me?
It's exciting down there. What exciting, but
Yeah, it was interesting.
yeah, there's unadorned as this is adorned. We're going to go up to the box level now. Ready?
Oops.
We'll meet you where you are.
He mentioned other stairs up at the front.
Yeah, now imagine there's supposed to be 2 more chairs in this box as well. There's
Oh,
supposed
really?
to be six chairs in every box, and these 2 are actually larger than the rest of them.
Really?
This is where Governor Phillips sat on opening night in 1915. Terrible sight lines to the stage. It was wonderful for making a nice speech to the crowd, Mr. Ringling, for this fabulous theater. These are some of the, these are not some, these are the most precious and beautiful fixtures in the theater. This glass is irreplaceable, and you can see some of the blue paint color on there that they discovered during the restoration process.
Wow.
These are also the original chairs. There should be, like I said, 6 in
Really?
each box. So there's 102 seats here in the balcony, or the box level at one time.
Wow, that's a full box.
Yeah.
Very neat.
All right, we can go up to the upper level. At least now we have step lights, which we didn't even have for 100 years.
That's funny. The codes of today that you'd never pass, but
No.
100 years ago, people in long dresses did fine.
Yes. Come on down over here to Al Ringling's box. You can see the full complement of chairs.
Oh, wow.
Man.
This is where Al Ringling sat on opening night. He sat in one of these chairs. We're just not sure which one.
You just want a spot to sit down.
Yep.
The best spot.
So Al and Lou did not have any kids of their own, so they doted on their nephews. Al's nephew,
nice
Henry
seat.
Ringling Jr., sat with him in this box on opening night, and ironically became the last of the Ringling family to own this theater up until 1953. And it was in his house, the yellow Ringling house, if you've seen that on 8th Street, that we found the 49 file drawers full of papers related to the theater.
And so now who owns each of the buildings?
The Yellow House just passed out of Ringling family hands in 2015. Its current owner is actually Stuart, that you bought tickets from, is the owner of that house with his partner Julie. They run it as the Ringling House Bed and Breakfast. The Al Ringling Mansion was given to his sister after Al died and Lou moved out, and then that became the Elks Club in 1936. And they sold it with rights to stay in the basement. There's a bar down in the basement and a bowling alley. Until I think just this year they finally got moved out, and that's under private ownership, run as a event space. There's a big hall. We called it the dance floor. It was a beautiful space up there. It was like being in a domed ballroom. And even at that, they still had a 15-foot rolling scaffolding on top of that to restore the clouds and the rest of the ceiling. So.
Must have been a specialty firm
Oh, it
that
was,
had
yeah,
to do something like that.
Out of New York, they had just restored another Rap and Rap theater in the Bronx called, I think it's the the King's Theater. That was a $90 million restoration. Wow. The decorative finishes here alone cost $750,000 to restore. This level, not for downstairs, just the box level, the ladies' lounge.
Do you want us to help you? No?
And this is just this place for the ladies to congregate, smoke behind closed doors.
Nobody's using it.
Yeah, the women's bathroom there, a little bathroom here.
Are you using the bathroom?
Yeah.
Oh, it's actually a usable bathroom.
It is.
Look.
Yeah. Take pictures so that man can see it.
What man can see?
The man's
Oh. I'm sorry.
Originally, this was a canopy, but in 1937 became the leather.
Well, they put some work into that rubber roof there. That certainly.
This was all restored back in 2015 as well.
Did you say how much the restoration cost?
$3 million at that time. But since 1989, probably closer to $5 million. So it's a pretty good building. There's a steep staircase ladder up to the projection room, and that's just a blank false door to match that on the other side. So, all right. Any last questions?
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for coming. It's just an absolute pleasure to give tours here now and not have to use the word someday.
That's where we're headed.
Good.
Then we're going to go play pickleball.
That is an interesting glass around the front door is a different style than the stained glass 5 feet in around the inner door.
Oh, I
You lock this up.
know something. The
The water still works.
there was your
His parlor and a German disc. Backlash.
Go out, but you can't come in, eh?
That's right. Can't make sure my wife's behind me.
And that's where Brenda works.
Oh, she texted me and said she saw us going in.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
At
that was very
the
neat.
courthouse. She's probably out there looking now.
Maybe not.
Yeah, well,
How busy she is.
that was very good.
That was very good.
Yeah. It kind of looks like the car that was the Model A that was at the golf course. It was 1805. Yep, that's the same Model A that was at the golf course when we went to fish fry. Model A. Huh? Well,
Or we're gonna have to reset.
Well, I do, I want 36 of those.
if you want to.
No, punch card, no. I want $36.
$40. Pretty pricey for, but I guess going into restoration, eh?
Yeah, it's a good cause.